So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sam Harvey from the Center for Career and Professional Development, and this is our second coffee and conversations of the fall semester. Today we're going to talk about identifying your goals. So the coffee and conversation is a series that that happens every other Wednesday, where I talk about sort of career basics information. And if you ever miss one, you can always find them at our YouTube channel. I believe we are Pratt Talent, or maybe it's Pratt Career. But you can always look through our social media to be able to find these videos later on if you ever miss them, or if you see one and you're like, oh, I want to go back and look at that later. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into goals. So goals are important for planning out your career, because it's going to give you that idea of what sort of stops you have to make along the way. Just to use probably a really tired metaphor, you're not just going to be able to climb a mountain. It's not just, cool, you're at the bottom and then you're at the top. There's different things that need to happen in order for you to get from one place to another. So we're going to talk about how you can start to think about those long-term goals in order to really plan out kind of your current next steps, but also what you're going to want to be doing 5 years from now and how you kind of keep track of all of those things. Really throughout, you're going to have different levels of these goals. That's that idea of like the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, something like that. And it's also important to know that your plan is going to change as you see your career progress and as your priorities change. So nothing you do is ever going to be a cut and a dry, oh, I need to do this by now. If I don't, everything's over. There's always room for change and to go, but the goals really can help you keep on a certain track that you're working towards. So if you have questions, you can ask them along the way. I might answer them right away. Otherwise, there will definitely be a chance at the end of this to ask some more questions that you have. Okay, so where do you actually start when you're trying to figure out, well, what are your goals going to be? So I think an important place to start is to figure out how you got where you are right now. So if you're a current student right now, that means really thinking about what were the things that made you decide on your major or why you decided to come to Pratt. If you're an alum at this point, then also maybe same thing of why you chose the specific major in, but also why did you end up living where you're currently living, or why did you choose the current position that you're holding, or sort of kind of going through what is all the things that led you to where you are now. And now after you've kind of thought about what sort those things were, think about if you would make the same choices over again. Would you pick the same major that you already are in right now? Would you move to a different city? Would you decide to pursue a completely different area of interest? Really starting to think about, if you were to go back based off the person that you are right now, how would those decisions change, or would they, or wouldn't they at all? So this is an important part to reflect on how you got where you are now, so you can decide what you want to do next. If you would make the same choices over again, awesome. If you had to change things, awesome. Either way, it's going to be about trying to decide if you want to keep in the direction that you've currently been building towards, or if it's time to change that direction or not. If it's that, actually I would rather go back and not be a fashion major. I'd rather go back and be a jewelry major. Okay, you're not going to go back and change the future, but that gives you a really idea of maybe the direction you want to be heading towards, is maybe away from whatever fashion you were working on and moving more into the accessories world in order to gain the skills to maybe be more into a different type of job. So a really concrete example of that actually is that I studied graphic design as an undergraduate, but I'm currently doing my career in higher education, career advising, obviously working here to talk to you all about career paths. I wouldn't have go back and change my original major, because communication is something that I actually think is super important in all aspects of the work that I currently do. However, it was in looking back on sort of my choices throughout undergrad that made me decide to shift away from a career in design to move more towards my interest in an educational role and really being able to share my experiences with people and help sort of foster this growth. So it was really by looking back into, no, I wouldn't necessarily change this about my major, but I also wouldn't change how involved I had been on my undergraduate campus And I really loved that aspect of that. That helped me decide that it was maybe a time to shift away from design into a more educational role. So when you start to reflect really on the decisions you made that led to where you are, you can start to make these goals that push you towards your next trajectory. So me having a design background and realizing I wanted to work in a higher education setting meant needing to get more skills that was going to align me to the position of being in a higher education role. And that meant, in my case, going back for a master's degree. So in order to get to that goal, I had to set another smaller goal of the master's degree. So another important thing when you're trying to set these goals is to figure out what your values are. The next thing you're going to do is, I started to read my same thing over again. So if you're really valuing right now the idea of getting experience, you're going to want to find things that are going to help you to get an experience. If you want money, that's going to be different. Maybe you skip an opportunity at a small firm that allows you to get more hands-on experience because the big firm is going to pay their interns. These are your values. So it's up to you to really figure out what is it that matters most to you at this point in time. And also in some cases, what's going to matter to you in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. You can't predict that. It's going to change as your life changes. This allows you to just figure out what the important things are right now. Like, yes, maybe your ultimate goal is to open up your own business, but right now you need to make sure that you're feeding yourself and anyone else that you're in charge of. So the important thing might be money right now, and the opening of your own business might take a backseat to that, and that's fine. And it's just going to kind of lengthen the time of your plan to get to that ultimate goal. But it's important to take the stock in these things so that you can set yourself up with realistic goals rather than saying, well, okay, I'm going to get this open in 3 years, except I'm not at the point where I'm making enough money to really feed myself and start to put away a nest egg for things. If you're in that place, awesome. If you aren't, that's also okay. You're going to make some changes to get yourself into a position where you can start to save up that money. The next sort of important thing is, what would you do if you couldn't fail? So a big aspect of setting your goals is to figure out really where do you want to go. So I'm going to have you all just take a minute right now, close your eyes if you want to, zone out a little bit, really take that for a moment, just like breathe in a little bit, breathe out. What would you do if you couldn't fail? If you had all the resources that you needed in the world, what would you be doing? What would your regular day look like? What would you be focusing your career on? This is going to be kind of a time to really culminate together those values and your current interests, to think about what do you want deep down inside. I mean, as much as I will definitely start out saying, like, money's important, having those foundational things to just generally exist in the world are really important. But there's also an important thing when you're thinking about your career of how it affects you. Are you actually excited about this thing that you're doing? There's ways to get to this ultimate goal of whatever it is you're picturing right there. When I say, what would you do if you couldn't fail? There's going to be steps along the way to get there. It's not necessarily always going to be the quickest, easiest route to get there, but there's ways to get there. And think in ultimate, great, amazing things that you want to do. And then we're going to figure that out. And the next step is now get there. So if now that you have this sort of hopeful little vision of what do you want to do, why did you decide to pick the major you decided, was because you probably had some sort of career goal in mind, or at least what you wanted your regular day to look like. That's a great place to start, because now it's about planning out the steps to get there. So it's probably like, okay, cool that you can say that, but how do I actually do that? So you need to start to figure out what might be holding you back. Is there anything that's specific about the way you're doing your work, you're approaching your work, anything in your life that would hold you back from getting this goal? Is it the experience that you actually have? Is it a skill set you don't have? If this is your ultimate goal, it's about kind of taking stock of all of the things you need to get there. So starting to think, I'm going to just kind of go back to this idea of opening up your own business is a big one that I think a lot of people are interested in often at the school. Capital, that's an important part of that, having the sort of money to be able to take that risk. That's important. Do you have the skill set not only to do the thing your business is going to do, but to also handle the clients that you need to do? If you don't have that skill, to handle the finances, if you don't have that skill set, do you know other people that do have that skill set, and would they be willing to partner with you? So it's about sort of filling out what do you need. It's your grocery shopping list of what is this thing going to actually end up being? How would I need to live this life? And write all of that down and start to figure out what you actually know. Do you know where you could get these things? Do you already know people? That's going to start to allow you to figure out what your smaller goals are going to be along the way. So then you have to actually plan out the steps. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there's this idea of like a 5-year plan. That's what you need to figure out, is what are the steps along the way if you want to launch, so fashion line. So you're going to need to make these contacts to both sell your line, but also to help you produce it. So that might be that in 5 years, you're going to have to make connections in the fashion world on both ends. So if you want to launch your line in 5 years, what do you need to do to be able to get that? So you're likely going to have to start to get jobs within the industry. Your first job in this realm of going through the fashion, launching your fashion line, might be that you need to have a job that's going to put you in contact on the manufacturing side of things, so that you start to understand how these garments actually go from the design side to being produced on a large scale. You need to understand that in order to write your business plan, because the people are going to want to know, well, how is this going to make money if you're manufacturing and it's going to cost millions of dollars? How is that going to translate to the market side? So then the next jobs you're going to have to start moving towards is going to be looking on that marketing side of things. How do you make the connections that get your work featured in magazines? What goes into buying ads and creating partnerships? How do you get yourself featured on a celebrity? How does that all work and build up? This is information you're going to have to start to acquire through research, through jobs, through the connections that you're going to make. It's not going to be something you're necessarily going to sit down at a computer and figure out all in one go. And that's why it's a multiple year plan that you're looking into. And your steps aren't necessarily going to be like, cool, I need to do this, check, now I need to do this. It might be, that in 5 years you want to start doing something, and what are all these various things you need to do before you can do that. So in the case of even applying to art school, part of that was, okay, you needed to build a portfolio. You even probably needed to take certain art classes within your high school in order to get there. Maybe there wasn't a specific class 1, class 2, class 3. Maybe it was, okay, I'm going to take a ceramics class now. I'm going to take a photography class now. You could do it in any sort of order, but the important thing was doing it in order to build your portfolio so that you could, after 4 years, go to art and design school. So in 5 years, if you want to work for yourself, how much money do you need to save up? That's one part of what the 5-year plan is going to look like. How many other people do you need to have on board? That's something else you're going to be working on throughout this 5 years. You need to know these things, or it's always going to be an abstract idea in your head about what's going to come next. You're going to go, oh yeah, I'm going to start this thing. But until you actually start to put the numbers out on paper, put these concrete amounts down, it's never going to start to feel like it's moving forward. It's just going to kind of be there in the ether forever. So the important thing from there is then to start keeping track and adjust as you're going. So after you've done sort of all this research to start figuring it out, and as I've said, it might not be the perfect plan to begin with. You're going to have to make adjustments on your plan. It's up to you to keep yourself on track. You can do this by doing a regular check-in with yourself. If it's a pretty short-term goal or something you're really passionate about, make a monthly check-in with yourself where you can evaluate what the next steps you've made towards the goal have been in the next month. So what have you done this last month in order to get you there? Even if it's not a monthly check-in that you're doing, as much as every couple of months, maybe every 6 months, a couple times a year, depending on the length of this project, set aside time so that you're really taking stock of what you've done to move yourself forward along this track that you're doing. It might just be something you're doing passively also on a regular day as you make decisions. At work, are you deciding to take on a new project? Okay, what's this going to do as far as contributing to your next goal? If your goal is to continue to move up in the company, maybe taking on that project is a great way of doing that. If your goal is to do something for yourself, start your own business, and you already have a side project that's going to lead you to that, and taking on this new project might interfere with that, then maybe you say no to that. So it's always about kind of checking in along the way about how does this choice contribute to this ultimate goal that I have. If you're not the type of person that's going to put the check-in on your calendar or do this on a regular basis, it's also important, and even if you are that type of person, it's important that you also have a support group. So your friends, your family, your colleagues to hold you accountable to these goals. I'd say I do it all the time where I tell people, oh yeah, this is kind of what I'm thinking my next move is going to be. I'm a couple of years off from that, but that's a thing then that they will probably check in with me about whenever I see them, if it's especially family members I don't see very often. When you tell people about your plans, they're more likely to ask you about them, and I definitely see that as, in my case, a really important way of kind of keeping yourself in check, on track, because that gives you, when that person checks in about where you are on that, a chance to kind of go, oh yeah, here's where I am on that, or to go, actually, I've changed my mind. This is kind of where I see myself heading now. And if every time you see that person, you realize you're changing your mind about your goals, you probably haven't become as concrete with your goals as you would like to be. So breaking the goals into smaller steps. If you're interested in starting your own business, which is kind of all we've worked on, and you need to network, give yourself networking goals within that. So an example would be going to 5 events over the course of 1 year, and then getting 5 new potential contacts at each of these events. These should be small goals. They should be measurable. So I don't know if any of you have ever heard the word SMART goals before. That's not one word, but SMART goals are a really important thing for especially breaking down these larger goals into more clearly defined ideas. So you want them to be specific. So in the case of what I just gave you, the specific thing is that you're trying to build your network. You want them to be measurable. So it's going to 5 events to meet 5 new potential contacts at each event. You can measure that out. You can at the end go, cool, I met 3 people. Oh, cool, I met 12 people. There's a number attached to it that you can get that. The next one is attainable. You want to give yourself things that you're going to reach. If you just say, I'm going to start a business in a year, that's not an attainable thing for you to do. That's a really big, lofty goal that is very likely to freeze you. Saying that you're going to be going to 5 events over a year, that's not as ridiculous to be able to consider. That might also be too small. It's going to be about kind of considering what are your priorities right now, what reasons would you have for not going to events, can you find these events, really doing some research before you decide on a number. In this case, I picked an arbitrary number, but if you're setting your goal, really look into how often do these types of events happen, what's your general schedule like, how does that end up looking? And then you want to make sure they're relevant. You don't want to say, if your goal is to start your own business, that you're going to go to 5 events, but most of those events are just like happy hours with a team that you decided to join. In some ways, that might help in sort of weird circular ways that contribute to this new business, but it's not necessarily super relevant if your idea isn't to go into it and you don't know for sure that you're going to actually make networking contacts. If you do make networking contacts, that's more of a coincidence that happened rather than it being relevant. So the events you go to should be relevant to the type of business you're looking to start. And then time bound. There needs to be a deadline. Otherwise, you could just be like, cool, I'm going to go to 5 events. Cool, you have now 60 plus years to go to 5 events. So giving yourself these deadlines is also that idea that it will hold you accountable. If it doesn't happen by that deadline, you can take that time to look back and figure out why. Was it that you really didn't try to go to anything? Was it that something happened in your life and it got a little bit busier? That's fine. That allows you to understand that your timetable is just going to change a little bit, or maybe it just means you need to go, if you only went to 3 events, that you need to go to 2 within the next month in order to make up for the lack of completing it within the time that you've given yourself. And then the most important thing is to be open to change. As you learn more and meet new people and new things become a priority, your goals are going to change, and that's totally fine. Every time you see this sort of change happening, take a step back, reevaluate, and recenter. It's never too late to change your mind about where you want to go. You might need to learn new skills, but there's always time to do that. There's plenty of programs out in the world that are here to teach you these new skills. It's just about understanding that you need to learn the new skill first and giving yourself that goal of going, okay, I'm ready for a changing career. What's the newest software that I need to learn in order to get there? Cool. Now I need to learn that software, and looking into the resources about doing that. So when you break things down into these smaller goals, they don't seem as big and far away, but they're going to be kind of the little pellets, or pellets isn't the good thing, the little pittons, yeah, I think that's the rock climbing thing, the pittons along the way that help you to reach that top bigger goal that you have in your mind. Okay, so that's all on my end. I'm gonna go ahead, I've been recording this and end the recording, but then there's time if any of you have questions.